Today is February 13th, 2019. I am interviewing Mr. Marolda at the Gilbert School in Winsted, Connecticut. The interviewer is Caleb Goodell, a student of the Gilbert School. Also present is the camera operator, Mr. Morgan, also a teacher at the Gilbert School. Please state your full name and date of birth.
Theodore R. Marolda, M-A-R-O-L-D-A, May 6, 1923.
And the city and state which you live.
That's Connecticut.
Which ward
Winsted, Connecticut.
Okay. Which ward did you serve?
World War II.
What was your branch of service?
Marine Corps.
What was your highest rank?
Gunny Sergeant.
And generally speaking, what locations did you serve?
I served in the South Pacific on Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and Cape Gloucester. That was Cape Gloucester was in the Rabaul, big Japanese naval base on Rabaul.
Okay, and what was a gunny sergeant?
Gunny Sergeant is 3 stripes and 2 underneath, 5 stripes. That's a Gunny Sergeant.
What was your job?
My job was amphibian tanks. And I think it's in the record there that I put down that I was a crew member.
Okay. So, did you enlist or were you drafted?
No, I enlisted.
You enlisted?
I enlisted the day the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. I enlisted that day.
And Mr. Marolda, why did you choose to enlist?
Well, because, well, it's a little story there. I was on my way to work, and I had a 1936 Ford. I was driving to work, and it took about 10 minutes to get to work to Torrington. And I turned on the radio in my little car, and I heard that the I never heard of Pearl Harbor. Well, anyway, they broke in the program and said the Japanese are bombing Pearl Harbor. And I thought it was another radio show. Because Orson Welles, Wars of the Worlds, that was just a year before, and so I thought it was just a story. So they kept breaking in on the program. Their ships were being blown up, and so then I realized it was true. So when I got to work, I run into my friend Phil DeLube from East Canaan, Connecticut. And I says, Phil, I'm going to go enlist tomorrow. And Phil said, oh, not me, I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to make big money. It comes the time to check out of work, Phil comes to me, I'm coming with you. So we went to Waterbury and we joined the Marine Corps. We actually told them, we took our physical, we were so worried they may not accept us here. I think they would have taken a corpse if we were enlisting at that time. Well, anyway, we passed the physical and everything, and we told them we didn't want to go until after the holidays, Christmas and New Year's. And they said, okay. Then they sent us to Springfield, and we signed up for 4 years. And then on a train, they sent us down to Paris Island. And on the way down, we had no idea what Marine Corps training was because there was no TV then, there was nothing, no movies. And everybody knows the Marine Corps training is pretty rough. But we had no idea. We thought we were going to a Boy Scout camp. And we learned right away that it was no Boy Scout camp. It was pretty bad. So we went through that. And you want to go on to, I don't know what you...
why did you choose the Marines?
I don't know. We were thinking about the Navy. And because this Phil DeLue with me, his brother served in the Navy for about 10 years before the war. And they were saying how they have good food in the Navy, and you're on a ship and you're not in dirty trenches. But anyway, we decided to sign up in the Marine Corps.
So, what were the first days like when you got to boot camp?
Very bad. We went down and 3 drill instructors got on the train, and they called us all kinds of names. We were the poorest recruits ever entered the Marine Corps. Where'd they find you? From maybe the city dump? And get on your hands and knees and clean up this dirty, filthy mess here. And on and on and on went. And we were just dumbfounded. We just couldn't believe it. They put us on trucks and drive us through the gate onto Paris Island. And,
Mr. Bramble, please call 1412. Mr. Bramble, please call 1412.
And on the way in, all the fellows that were there called us, "You'll be sorry," and we were. They brought us in, made us strip all our clothes off and throw it in a pile. I said, "I can't send those clothes. It's my brother's brand new suit. I got to send it home." Throw them in a pile. So we're nude, and they come out and spray us to kill all vermin, because in those days we had a lot of farmer boys coming in all over New England, and they wanted to kill all. If you had lice, they wanted to kill all the lice. So then we were all nude, and we walked down a line, and they gave us clothes, and they judged by your size what size to give you. And we went to boot camp, and we started with that. The training was very, very hard. A little footnote to that. Years later, on one of the campaigns, we were loading up for another landing, and I heard this voice, and it was the drill sergeant. He was a World War I veteran. He was my drill sergeant. So I went over to him and I said, "Sergeant, can I ask you a question?" He says, "Go ahead." I said, "Why in the world was the so brutal, and why was it almost cruel treatment for you?" I said, "Why?" He says, "We're trying to break you mentally and physically. We're trying to break you." I said, "But why break us down?" He said, "Because it's better to break you down here than in combat, and you could cause a lot of Marines to be killed." So after that, I was proud I got through boot camp. Yeah. Then after boot camp, they sent us to New River, North Carolina, and we were supposed to train. We were taking in our amphibian tanks. Amphibian tanks are land at sea tanks. By the way, it was the first amphibian tank in the world, and a Marine colonel told me recently that because of the first amphibian tractor battalion, that changed the history of the Marine Corps. That's how important it was, because we were the first. So we were training there for a short period of time, and they sent us to, that was New River, North Carolina. They had no facilities for us, and we had to put up tents. And being in an amphibian tank, we had to be near the water. So it was a lot of swamps in that area. So it wasn't very pleasant, but we trained there for a short period of time. Then we were ordered to Virginia, and we got on a transport, which was again not ready for troops. It was in Manhattan, a luxury liner out of New York City, and we were. In fact, there's some literature in that paper about it that we were put down in the hold of a ship, and they had to make they welded beds on the wall 4 high, and we were on that ship from the day we got on. It was 31 days. We went through and at this time there was still seeking. The German submarines were really very active in the Atlantic, and we were escorted down through North Carolina, South Carolina, and down into the Panama Canal. And we were told when we sailed out, we went unescorted. We had nobody, no ships. We went one ship all the way, and they didn't tell us where we were going. So we were in the hole, and during the sunrise and sunset, they would lock us in with these big doors. Because in our compartment, because if we were hit there, we're dead, but the rest of the ship wouldn't fill with water. So sunset, and for about an hour and a half in the morning, for an hour and a half in the afternoon, we were locked in. So it wasn't. It was very crowded. There was 8,000 Marines and about 1,000 sailors on that one ship. And they told us if somebody fell off, they couldn't stop for him. He was lost. And then just before we got to New Zealand, they told us where we were going. Wellington, New Zealand. And it was a beautiful country, New Zealand. Really, the city was built almost like a punch bowl. On the shore, and then it went up, and beautiful houses all on these hills up above. And we set up camp there for 30,000 Marines. And we were very, very pleased to be in New Zealand because the veterans, the Australian and New Zealand men, were fighting in North Africa. So all these young ladies had nobody to go out with. And you know, the Marines volunteer, so we volunteered our service to help these poor damsels, you know. And it was funny because when you dated a girl, she came out in an evening gown. Even if you're going to the movies or restaurant, they have beautiful evening gowns. That's how they went. So anyway, we were supposed to train there for 6 months. It didn't happen. A bomber out of Australia found that the Japanese were building a huge airfield on Guadalcanal. If they completed that airfield, that would mean that the Australia and New Zealand would have been occupied. There was nobody there to protect them. There was nothing there, and they would have, within months, they would have been occupied by the Japanese. So it's an emergency thing. They told us my battalion, they said, go to the docks, right down to the docks. We had 30 transports. And when they load up a transport in the United States, it's haphazard. After all, they're just bringing supplies in. But when you go in combat, you have to, all those ships, every carton, everything on the ships had to be unloaded on the docks and reloaded for combat. And it wasn't too bad. At least it was fairly warm climate, but it was raining. So can you imagine all the cardboard boxes? There was food and especially the cereal boxes all fell apart. Anything that was in a cardboard box was all over the decks. And we had a hell of a mess. And this they were in a hurry to get it. They didn't want the Japs to complete that airfield. So we asked the officers asked the Australian soldier, longshoremen, very strong union there. Their nation's going to be occupied, and it wouldn't work. We wanted to put 8-hour shifts for the longshoremen. Oh no, we only work 8 hours, and we have to go home at night. And we said, desperately, we need help. And so General Vandergriff ordered a couple squads of Marines. He says, fix your bayonets and drive these guys off the docks. And they did. And he said, if you come back, we'll shoot you. They never came back. But here's our country going to be occupied. They won't work. So anyway, we got the ships all loaded, and we were supposed to have and we never once had a full division landing. It just because everything was rush. And one of our officers asked the general if, we didn't have the training we're supposed to. We're supposed to train in New Zealand for 5 or 6 months. And he says, you're going to get on the job training. So we landed. We weren't told where we were going. We had no idea what island or what it was, and we found out the day before it was Guadalcanal. And just before we landed, we had to make our last will and testament. We've had signed papers, and I signed a $10,000 insurance policy. You had to name somebody. Of course, I named my mother. And then we had lined us up, Catholics, Jews, Protestants. We had a minister, a rabbi, and they would hear your confession, especially the Catholics. And gee, I thought it was great because you could, you didn't have to talk to the priest at all. You just said it to yourself. Gee, I said, this is great. Now I won't have to lie so much. So anyway, we went and we landed on Guadalcanal, and it was fairly easy landing. We had very few casualties. Captured the airfield the second day, and then the thing turned sour. That afternoon, 40 Japanese torpedo bombers come in and flew over, and they sank a couple of our ships. And we were unloading. Once we loaded the troops, our amphibian, we could take about 20, 25 men and bring them ashore. And they have what they call waves. You don't just blow a bunch of things and send everybody in. First wave, second wave, and they'd circle. And then they'd say first wave in. So after we loaded got all the troops in, then we went back for the armaments. And I was surprised because the first thing off the ships was medical supplies. I said, why that? And then it dawned on me. You needed that because it was a bad landing like so many of them were. You need medical supplies and doctors and everything. And then we kept going, and that was one air raid, and we were lucky because we still had our aircraft carriers there, and they shot down most of the Jap planes. Then we were unloading, and about 2 o'clock the next morning, August 8th, the whole sky lit up. It was like daylight. They were dropping flares, and the flares stayed up for a long time. And then we heard this terrible bombardment and explosions going on, and terrible sea battle going on. The Japanese fleet came in down a couple hours sooner than they expected. So they sailed right in among our ships and sank 4 heavy cruisers. Two ships went down immediately, and not many of the crew got off because just went down so fast. The next day, 2 more of the cruisers sunk, and the 5th cruiser had the bow blown off, but they saved it. They saved it. So here we are now with no support. The admiral of the Pacific Fleet called and told our general that we can't supply you with air power. We're pulling out our aircraft carriers. So when the aircraft carriers pulled out, all the troop ships pulled out with all our supplies. We had a 10-day supply of food, and God knows how much ammunition we unloaded. All our heavy artillery was not unloaded. And we needed the heavy artillery to keep the Japanese at bay. Well, anyway, they pulled out and they took all our equipment to build the aircraft. But thank God our bombers didn't blow up with the Japanese. I don't know what we'd have done if we had nothing there, because here we are, and they told us goodbye, good luck. And we never saw another ship or anything in there for almost 2 months. We were abandoned. The Navy said they can't help us. We had no Air Corps, and we had to get through, and it was terrible. Land battles. We were there 10 days, and one of the finest Japanese regiments landed, and they were going to take the airfield. And by the way, the Japanese were not defeated in 250 years. They beat everybody, land and sea, and all the Pacific. They took all the islands in the Pacific at the start of World War II. And so they never were defeated. So this colonel he makes out the papers for General Vandegrift to sign the surrender papers. He had his dress uniform with him, and he was all set because they never lost the battle. It was just going to be another win for them. Well, it wasn't. they met, they came at our group that were defending. They sent a banzai charge of 200 Japanese. They were wiped out completely. Every man died. Then they said 200 in. Send a banzai with fixed bayonets. Moline, you're going to die, and all that stuff. That was 400 dead in piles. It was just slaughter. Then they decided that they'd go out to the water and send 400 more and try to outflank the Marines. Another slaughter. So the next day, the whole regiment was wiped out. There was 1,400 dead Japanese in piles in an area that was smaller than a football field. Just piles of them. And they never found the colonel. They never found his papers. They never found his flag that he was going to wave, his regimental flag. As far as we know, he just disappeared. They never found his body or anything. And there was very few. They'd rather fight to the death than surrender. And the banzai charge against machine guns, it was slaughter. So then it went on like that. They put us on half rations. And before we left, we all lost 35 to 40 pounds, because and if it wasn't for the Japanese expecting to occupy that island with 30 or 40,000 troops, and they're very efficient at what they did. They built warehouses, and they stocked it with mostly rice and 5-gallon cans of rice and fish oil and fish heads, just a head. And there was other food supplies too. If it wasn't for that, because we had so little food, we would have starved. And they know that for a fact, because ships couldn't come in. And this went on for almost 2.5 months before we finally came in. And only because the admiral in charge of he was in charge of the Marine Corps and the Pacific Fleet, they relieved him of duty, because this is the way it went. They sent in a letter to us, and we knew it too. They said, we can no longer supply you, you're on your own. You'll have to, we can't supply you at all. General MacArthur, all the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, the Navy said, we can't supply you, you're on your own. And it got down to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the president. The president said, we can't take another defeat. The people will just go mad if we lose 15,000 Marines on Guadalcanal. And things changed. They changed the admiral. They put another admiral, and his name was Bull Halsey, and he was very aggressive. And things almost immediately started to get better. They would sneak in 4 or 5 World War I destroyers, and they would put food on the side, and they would put 50-gallon drums. And they couldn't stay because the Japanese fleet controlled the air and they controlled the sea. They'd sneak in with these fast little boats and drop the 50-gallon drums and let us go to shore. It would float. And this went on constantly. It was terrible battles. There was just so many different things that it was just one thing after the other. And then on top of that, we all got malaria, juggle rot, and what else was there? Was another one too. A lot of the fellows got, they called it elephantitis. Your feet would swell up like this, and other parts of you would swell up like that too. And they called it elephantitis because your feet would disappear and your toes would look like an elephant. Well, anyway, this went on for almost 6 months, and then finally they brought an Army group in, and I didn't mention this before, but we had all World War I equipment. We had nothing new. We had the old Springfield rifle. Now, I know you probably know what a bolt action is. 5 shots. Every time you pull the bolt back, push it forward, you pull the trigger. You can do that. And then but the M1, when an Army unit come in, they had the M1s, and that's 8. And all you had to do was, once you got the cartridge in the first one, you could pull the trigger 8 times. And boy, that made a big difference. But our equipment was all old World War I equipment. And finally, before Christmas, and every day we would be bombed by, and we knew when they were coming because the coast watchers, Australian coast watchers, were in the other islands, and they would tell us how many planes were coming in, how many bombers, how many fighters, and they always got there about 12 o'clock. And so we knew they were coming, we could get to shelter. And then for almost 2.5 months, every night, Japanese ships would come in, there was nothing to stop them, they would shell us all night long. And not all night, 2-3 hours. And then they would get away before daylight. And then about 2 weeks after we landed, we had no aircraft, and we heard motors coming. When we heard motors coming, we're diving for shelter. We looked up, and there were American planes. Every Marine on that island were wild, jumping down and hollering and screaming. And that's what we had for another 2 or 3 months, maybe 8 or 10, 15 planes at a time, fighting against 40 Japanese bombers and well, anyway, they did a wonderful job. They were brave pilots, and we had quite a couple of Congressional Medal of Honor winners. So then and Colonel Roosevelt was in the Raider department, a Marine Raider, and the Raiders did a wonderful job. They were trained, Raiders and paratroopers. Paratroopers never jumped, never once in the Pacific, all the wind. It wasn't feasible. But they were trained a little better than we were. The Marines are always trained. Every man is a rifleman, man or woman. You have to be, if you could fire your rifle in boot camp, you were discharged. So this, what was I saying now? I lost my track. What the heck was I saying?
You're excited to see
Well,
the American planes.
Huh?
You're excited
Oh
to
yes,
see
his son, Colonel Roosevelt, was in the Raider department. And they did a hell of a job. They was in a couple of battles. I got a picture. You'll see that the Japanese kept coming up this mountain, and the Raiders were down to when they left the island, a whole battalion. There was 180 men left out of the whole Raider battalion, and the same thing with the paratroopers. They were in the front lines, right up in the front, and on the different battles, the Japanese again would scream and run up. There wouldn't banzai charges, and a couple of those battles there was like 2,000 or 3,000 dead Japanese. There was a hill like this. The Marines were up here, and the Japanese had to get up over the top of it, and they just kept coming and coming. And that went on for almost 6 months. And then finally things changed. Ships start coming in with food, artillery, replacements. Another Marine unit came in, and then we were released. And just before Christmas, they sent us to another island, and we spent Christmas. And we had the first time in 6 months, we had fresh meat, we had butter, we had cheese, we had bread. It was unbelievable. And then and our colonel told us we'd be going home soon. But that wasn't the case. We